Hello everyone. In this video, we will see some of the features of Amazon's Route 53 service. So Route 53 can be used to secure a domain name within Amazon. It can be used to domain name to IP address mapping using the hosted zone feature. It also provides health checks, DNS based health checks. And when doing domain name to IP address mapping, you can use any of these routing policies to decide how the resolution happens. So let's see how this works. So first, I'll show you the domain name registration. So whenever you want to have a domain name for your business, right? So say for example, google.com is a domain name. So you want some domain name for your business to host your website. You would purchase it from any of the domain registration services. Okay, so it could be GoDaddy, HostAlligator, and so on and so forth. So AWS also provides you to purchase domains. So you can go to the Amazon console and then you can go to the Route 53 service and the Route 53 dashboard. So Route 53 is a global service. So meaning you don't have to select any region. It applies equally throughout all the regions. So it's universal. Now in the Route 53 dashboard, you will see under domains, registered domains. So this is where you can purchase domains. Say for example, I have this domain. So you can register a new domain. You can check the availability of a domain. Say for example, I'll just say example.com, which obviously might not be there. So you can do check and then you'll be able to see if it is available. If yes, at what price it is available. So you can see it is not available. But then there are some other options which are available and you can purchase it for 1 year or multiple years and you can basically AWS will support this domain name for you. So this is the domain registration. Now let me cancel this. Now, once you have registered a domain, what you would want to host your application, your business application and website and all. So for that, what you need is host name to IP address mapping. Say for example, I have launched my application in one of the EC2 instances. So when you launch an EC2 instance, if it is launched in a public subnet, you will get a public IP address. So basically, you'll get a public IP address which can be accessed over the internet. Also, you get a public DNS name, but this is not very easy to remember for your customers, and you would want some logical name, right? So, say for example, if I launch this site, then I'm getting this web page. If I use this name also, I will be able to access the same website. But again, this name, although this is a domain name, it's not very convenient from your business perspective. So what you can do, you can use Amazon's Route 53 to, and in this use the hosted zone option. So hosted zone option is where you can define the domain name for which you want to add the name to IP address mappings. So since I have purchased this domain, I am also using AWS hosted zone. So actually there's a link between what I have purchased and then I can say I also want to host it from AWS. So it's not mandatory that you purchase a domain from AWS, then you have to host it on AWS. Or if you want to host something on AWS, you have to purchase this from AWS. So there's no compulsion, but you have an option. So when you host a zone, and if it's a domain that you have purchased, then you will have to, so these entries will come by default, which is the name server. So these are AWS's domain names, which will receive all the requests coming for this particular domain name. So anyone on the internet who tries to access this domain name will be redirected to these domain name servers within AWS. And now in this domain, we can launch our applications and use subdomain names and then map different applications to different names. So let's see that. So for example, this is one of my business services and I want to access this using www.learnthetech.com. So then I can go and click on create record. Now there are two ways you can create. This is a wizard, which is a simpler way wherein you select what type of routing you want, and then it will ask you the next questions. And this is the another way wherein you simply put in the details and you create record. So first I'll basically show this. So suppose I want to host my website as www.learnthetech.com, and whenever user launches this URL in their browser, what I want them to get redirected to this particular IP address. So what I have done is in Mumbai region, I have launched an EC2 instance with this sample web page. So I'm going to add this IP address as the IP that should get resolved when anyone tries to access this URL. And because I am giving an IP address, I am choosing the option of A record. So in DNS, there are different types of records. So you have an A record when you want to map it to an IP address. You have a C name if you want to map it to another host name. Say, for example, if I wanted to map it to this name instead of an IP address, then I could use the C name record, right? Similarly, if you want this record to be a mail server, okay, so if you are having a mail server, or there are different types of entries if you have another domain name server, and so on and so forth. So we'll keep it simple. We'll just use the A record for now and then give the IP address. And here you can choose what type of routing policy you want. So we'll come to that in a bit. We'll keep it the basic, which is simple routing policy. And then you can select the time to live for this record. So basically what this tells is whenever someone queries this domain name and they are returned this IP address, this IP address will be cached in the customer side DNS at least for this particular seconds. So if they request the IP address again, they will pick it up from their DNS cache rather than coming to AWS Route 53 and getting resolved. So this usually has a bearing on how much time will it take if you change this IP address for customers to get redirected, right? So if you keep this very high and if you change this IP address, then when customers are trying to access this, and if the IP address, previous IP address is cached because of the time to live that you have set, they will not be requesting again, and the changes you may have done, the customers will take time, or the browser of the customer will take time to reflect the new changes. So there's a balance that you can keep between how many times the customer's browser requests to find out the IP address. If you keep it too low, then there will be too many requests coming to this while you are not changing this IP address. So it's a balance between the number of requests that come versus how quickly you want the changes to get reflected. So for now, I'll just keep it 1 minute and then I can create this record. So once I create this record, now instead of accessing my application using this public IP or this AWS provided public name, I can simply type as the domain name, and you can see it is getting resolved to this Mumbai location, right? So this a simple domain name to IP address mapping. I'll talk about DNS health checks in a bit. First, let me explain some of the routing policies. So there are multiple routing policies that AWS provides as part of Route 53. So simple routing is when you want any request from any user to get resolved to those same set of IP addresses. And you need not add only one entry of an IP address for the same name. If you have multiple servers, you can add any entry, any number of entries, and then automatically the different IP addresses will be responded with for different set of requests, right? So this is a simple routing policy when you just map a domain name to IP addresses. Now, sometimes what happens is you have multiple servers, but the capacity of those servers is not equal. And then what you want to do is you want to maybe possibly divide the number of users whenever they request your website. So suppose you have two servers, one having a capacity X, other having capacity, let's say 2X. So you want one request to come to one server, two requests to go to the other server, again one request to come to your first server, and so on and so forth. So in such a case, you can use the weighted routing policy, and you can assign weights, and the proportion of the weights you can keep as 1:2. So for example, you can say weight of 100 for the first server and weight of 200 to the second server, or weight as 1 and 2. So the proportion between the weights is how AWS decides how to resolve the IP address. So whenever first request comes for your domain name, AWS will respond the first IP address, and for the subsequent two requests, the second IP address will be resolved. Again, for the next request, the first server will be resolved, and so on and so forth. Now, sometimes you have users spread across the world, and you have launched your application in different AWS regions. And what you want to do is you want to direct user to the EC2 instance which is closest to the user's location. Say for example, if I am accessing something from Mumbai, I should be redirected to an EC2 instance which is in the Mumbai region. Or if I'm accessing from, let's say, anywhere in the US, North America, then I should be redirected to an EC2 instance that I have launched in North Virginia, right? Or any such scenario. So in that case, you can use the geolocation routing policy. Then the next routing policy is latency based. So latency based you can use when you want user to be directed to the nearest location. Okay, so it doesn't matter which geographical region. You may have EC2 instances in various regions, and you want AWS to find out which region or which EC2 instance in which region would give the smallest latency, smallest delay to the user wherever the user might be coming from. So then you use the latency based routing. Failure based routing you use when basically you have multiple servers and one of which is acting as a primary or a production service. And if it fails, you want AWS to resolve to your standby service, right? So in that case, you use the failover routing policy. And multi-value answer policy you can use when you want AWS to return multiple IP addresses. And for failure and multi-answer, it is necessary that along with this, you also use the DNS health checks, wherein the DNS health check will check whether the particular IP address is responding, particular backend server or backend site is responding or not. Only then it will resolve to that IP address. So in multi-answer, basically you will be responding with multiple IP address. When I say you, AWS will be responding with multiple IP addresses, but those should be the healthy. So AWS DNS health check would be keep on checking which are the healthy records, and up to 8 records can randomly be resolved as a response to user's DNS query. So these are the different routing policies. So we will see the simple, weighted, and geolocation amongst these. So I'll go to the Route 53. And let's take, so I have already shown the simple. So let's see how the weighted routing policy will work. So say for example, I have my instances deployed in Mumbai region and in Oregon region. So let me also show you how the response will look like for the Oregon region. So if I give the IP address, public IP address, it will say welcome to Oregon. And if I give the IP address of the Mumbai EC2 instance, it will say welcome to Mumbai. So now if I want to equally distribute amongst these two servers, then what I can do, I can basically I'll modify this entry first, and instead of using the simple routing policy, here I will define the weighted routing policy, and I will assign a weight. Say for example, I want to have equal weights, then I will assign the same number. This number can be anywhere between 0 and 255. It's totally up to you. And then you define some name over here. So I will say, let's say Mumbai. Okay. And optionally, you can attach health check also, so that only if the backend application, backend IP address or whatever you map to is actually responding to the DNS health check and is found to be healthy, only then this IP address will be returned by AWS. Else, even though you have said, okay, distribute equally, if this is unhealthy, no point in giving back this IP address. So in that case, AWS would have responded only with the remaining entry, which was healthy. So let me save this record. Now let me add one more record for www and with the same weight, but a different server. So let me create one more record for www. And this time, let me give the IP address of the Oregon server and use the weighted routing policy. Keep the TTL to 1 minute. Keep the weight as same. So if you want unequal distribution, you can give the weights accordingly. And let me say Oregon. So now we have two entries responding to different IP addresses. So if I now go to www.learnthetech.com and if I try it multiple times, now what happens is one more thing is it's slightly difficult to demonstrate these changes because of the time to live. So once it checks, it stores that IP address and uses it for at least 1 minute. So this might not be evident here. Let me try with the command line. Yeah, so with command line also almost it would be the same. So let me pause for a second and then I'll try it again. Okay, so yeah, so now I think it's 1 minute has passed and now it is resolving the same to Mumbai. So this way, different users coming from different locations, when there are multiple users coming, they will get equally redirected, or the name will be resolved to the different IP addresses in a equal weights. Now let's see the geolocation. So in geolocation, when should you use geolocation? When you have launched your application in different regions of AWS and you want to direct users based on their geography to the nearest location. Say for example, whenever you launch Google, right? So if you are launching Google from anywhere in India, then you will be directed to Google's servers which are based out of India, and hence you will be redirected to google.in. If you are launching it from US, you will be redirected to the servers which are in the US. So this way, the latency for your application for the users is minimized if they are accessing the servers which are nearer to them. So to do that, you can, instead of the weighted routing policy, this time we will use the geolocation routing policy. So I can choose which region should be redirected to which record. Say for example, I can say if the user is coming from Asia continent, then the IP address that should get resolved is this one. So this happens to be the IP address of the Mumbai region. Okay, so I think first I need to delete these records. And now I will add these records again. Okay, so the records got deleted. Let me add the records now. So I will choose the geolocation, and here I will choose the location as Asia should be redirected to this Mumbai. Okay, and I will add another entry wherein again for the same domain name, user should be resolved to this IP address if they are coming from, let's say, North America. Okay, and I will say, and there's also an entry called as default. So, for example, if you want the rest of the world to go to a specific IP address, so people coming from Asia should be directed to Mumbai. People coming from, say, America should be directed to Oregon, and people coming from anywhere else should be directed to, let's say, Frankfurt. So I also launched my application in Frankfurt. So if I just give this IP address, okay, so it says North Virginia, which is wrong. Let me just correct it. Okay, so I've just updated the index.html. Now it says welcome to Frankfurt. So if I'm accessing this IP address, it will get redirected to Frankfurt. So now what I want the two geographies. So Asia directed to Mumbai, America directed to Oregon, and then I will say the rest of the world. So in the geolocation, you have a location called as default. So meaning rest of the people should get directed to Frankfurt. So I'll just put the IP address of Frankfurt over here. Okay, and create the records. Okay, so I think I had already, there was one blank entry, right? So you have one record for Asia pointing to Mumbai, North America pointing to Oregon, and the default pointing to Frankfurt. So now with this in place, if I access this URL, I'll be redirected to Mumbai automatically because I'm based out of India. Now, if I use VPN to choose my connectivity, internet connectivity to basically come from the US. So I will use, I have got this VPN. So I will reconnect my internet connection and simulate as if I am based out of the US. Okay, so now I am connected from the US, and now if I just enter this, you can see I am getting redirected to Oregon automatically. And now if I disconnect and change it to somewhere else, maybe Denmark. Okay, so now I've got reconnected via the VPN in Denmark. So let me try this again. And you can see I get redirected to Frankfurt. And if I disconnect my VPN, meaning I will default back to Mumbai and I get redirected to Mumbai. So this way, basically using the AWS Route 53 routing policies, you can use the simple routing policy for just any name to IP address mapping. If you don't have a specific preference, the IP addresses will be resolved one by one. Like say suppose you have 10 IP addresses, then the 10 requests will get resolved to those 10 IP addresses. But if you want an unequal distribution or with a specific proportion, then you use the weighted. You use the geolocation to direct users to the nearest location from a geography perspective. You use latency if you want to redirect users to the location which provides the smallest latency, right? And failover is for production to standby failover. If production fails, then the IP address that should be resolved is that of your standby. And if you want multiple IP addresses to be responded, up to 8 healthy records can be responded using the multi-value answer. One important feature about Amazon Route 53 service is that you can not only add the name to IP address mapping, but if you are launching any of the AWS services, so for example, you have launched AWS EC2 instances behind a load balancer, or you are hosting a website using AWS S3 service or CloudFront service or Elastic Beanstalk, then while creating records, you can simply point to those resources within AWS. So you can add a URL, say for example, www.learnthetech.com. And if you toggle this option alias, then you will be able to see all these different options in the drop down. And if you are using any of these services in the backend, you can map this record to not point to a specific IP, but to any of these AWS services. So suppose you have launched your website on S3, or you have basically launched an Elastic Beanstalk environment, or you have a CloudFront environment, or you have a load balancer and so on. So you can choose that in which region you want to map it to. And if you have already launched the load balancer, it will appear in this list as an example. Similarly, if you want to choose, let's say S3 website, again choose in which region. And if you already have that S3 website hosted, it will come in this drop down list and you can add that. One more useful thing to know is if you are using this as an alias record, then AWS does not charge you for any requests that AWS resolves from this name to this alias record. However, if you are resolving a name to an IP address, then AWS charges you for any name to IP address resolution. But with alias records, AWS does not separately charge you for these resolutions. So this is the AWS or Amazon Route 53 service for you. Thanks for watching.